All right, everyone, welcome today. Happy Friday to you all. We are doing another episode of Faithful Friday. I'm Dr. Trevor. It is great to be with you. So today we're going to jump into a biblical understanding of emotional intelligence. We got a lot to cover in the time that we have together today. So I just want to set up and first of all talk about what is emotional intelligence, why is it important, and then I want to just dig into a biblical foundation. And as we do that, I'm just going to kind of preface it early, which is there's a lot of content that I felt the need to just write it down. And so I'm going to do a lot of just reading today as we talk about what Scripture has to say and our biblical view and understanding, again, how emotional intelligence is a vital part of our lives and our experience. Ready to jump in? Okay, here we go. So first of all, let's talk about the idea of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, actually abbreviated oftentimes, is called EQ. Why is it called EQ? EQ stands for emotional quotient. It's the same type of idea we have of IQ, which is intellectual quotient. So when we kind of pair that together, IQ, intellectual quotient, and EQ, emotional quotient, we come up with this phrase that we push them together, which is emotional intelligence. So what we know about intellectual quotient, like IQ, is that it slows down at a certain point in our development. There's a certain age that it's not that we can't continue to increase our IQ, but it definitely diminishes in our ability to do that, just in the neurological, biological functions of our brain and the developmental part of science. But here's what's really interesting about EQ, or emotional intelligence, is this is a work that we can continue to do throughout our lives. And we have the ability to continue to increase and grow in emotional intelligence when we take practical steps along the way. So let me get back to this idea. So what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is our capacity to understand, manage, and express our emotions, this is an important part, like constructively, and our ability to relate to others on an emotional level. In fact, after you look through the traditional kind of framework or model for EQ, it actually is often depicted as this this quadrant, these four areas of focus. So the first area is self-awareness. The second area is self-management. So just to pause there for a second. So what the study of EQ and the growth and development in EQ, what it does is it helps us to increase our self-awareness, to be able to ask ourselves, hey, what am I feeling? What if I could give it a name? What if I could understand not just what am I feeling, but I'm able to understand where it's coming from, like why it's showing up inside of me. And then we pair that with this other critical function, which is not just self-awareness, but self-management, which is this part of us to be able to say, now that I know what I'm feeling and why I'm feeling it, how am I going to respond to it? That's the self-management part. Right, so this ability to be able to understand, manage, and express our emotions constructively. Okay, so that's kind of this top line of this quadrant in EQ. Self-awareness and self-management. And then in the bottom squares in this kind of quadrant, there is what's referred to as other awareness and relational management. So just by nature, you can see the top two, self-awareness and self-management, are centered around self, right? The work that I can be doing. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? How do I want to respond to it? And then these bottom two areas in the quadrant are really others focused, right? So the idea of other awareness, which is this idea to be able to recognize, hey, others have feelings too. And others may or may not be experiencing what I'm experiencing or feeling what I'm feeling. Other awareness. That's actually the space that we grow and develop empathy. Empathy to recognize and understand that others have feelings. And I can not just feel for them, but I can actually feel with them. That's this idea of empathy. And then that last box in the quadrant, which is relational management. So how do we take and apply all that we have learned in the awareness and the insight, whether that's maybe starting at the top part of the quadrant, self-awareness, self-management, and then applying and including the bottom part of this quadrant, other awareness and leveraging all of that in this idea of relational management. How do I live like interconnected with other people, but also how do I separate or differentiate that I am my own person with my own thoughts and my own feelings, and I know others have feelings and they have thoughts and they're going through experiences, and I'm able to use all of that insight in the way that I connect in meaningful ways with others. Okay, that was a lot to cover, but again, that's this idea of emotional intelligence. So I just want to walk you through several examples from Scripture where we see this show up. So here's this. Consider Jesus' deep emotional connection. This is in John 11:33 through 35. I'm going to read it for you. And it says, "When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. 'Where have you laid him?' he asked. 'Come and see, Lord,' they replied." And then here's the shortest but one of the most profound verses in all of Scripture. Jesus wept. Okay, so here in the story of John, this is the story of Lazarus who had passed away. All right, and Jesus is able to, first of all, pick up on the other awareness, the attunement of others. Right? They come, they're sad, there are tears, it says they're weeping. Jesus has the ability to be able to connect in that moment with them. And then as a response, he has his own emotional experience. Jesus wept. Let me just pause there for a moment. I think it's so profound. I've talked about this before, and I think it's really important to note. Like, we think about sadness, we think about grief, we think about the experience of crying. We often have been taught that those are bad things, wrong things. But I think this verse is one of many verses that helps us recognize that it's not bad, but rather it's appropriate. Like, sadness and grief is an appropriate response to loss. And we won't be able to get into all of it today, but just this idea that there's not so much that there are such things as good emotions and bad emotions, but rather there are just emotions. And there are appropriate times for us to feel certain things in the way that we process and the way that we express what's going on inside of us. In this case, an appropriate response, right? Jesus in his sadness, the others who were grieving. It says they wept. It says, and Jesus himself, right? The same experience. Okay, so here's another one. So reflect on Proverbs 16:32, where it says, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." Okay, picking up on this passage in Proverbs is talking to us about the idea of like emotional control. Or when I talked about emotional intelligence, it's that idea of self-management. Or how about this? Romans 12:15, where it calls us towards empathy and understanding. "Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn." Right? This ability to like emotionally align with others, this other awareness part of emotional intelligence. Okay, let's take this kind of a step further, and I want to kind of organize specifically around these areas. Let's go back to this quadrant I talked about. Self-awareness. Again, our ability to understand our own emotional experience and connect to that, like maybe our own triggers. So not just what we're feeling, but why we're feeling it. What's going on inside of us when that feeling shows up. So check this out in Psalm 139, around this idea of self-awareness. 139, it guides us. It says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there be any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Okay, this is a psalm of David, and he's being incredibly self-aware, right? He's understanding his own experience, right? When he's saying this prayer and he's inviting God into the process when he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart." Right? This ability to be able to take a deep, hard look within yourself. Okay, let's talk about this next area I talked about after self-awareness, talked about self-management. And I want to read a passage from Galatians 5. This is verses 22 and 23, where it encourages like self-regulation or self-management through like what we know as the fruits of the Spirit. It says this: but the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Right? This attribute, and more than this attribute, this is again what is called the fruit of the Spirit. Right? This idea of love, joy, peace. It goes through the list. Gentleness, so at the end of that, and self-control. Our ability to not only to express ourselves, but express ourselves with emotionally in a way that is helpful and healthy and constructive for us, and importantly, for others. Okay, so let's get to this next part in the quadrant. We talked about the idea of other awareness. So it's empathizing and understanding, right, the emotions of others. So here in Philippians chapter 2, it instructs us this. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, check that out, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So many of you have read this passage before, and you've heard it in maybe a sermon, or if you've read it in some other context about being able to live sacrificially or to serve others. But think about it in this way of other awareness, like social awareness. And this idea of like when you interact with others, like don't be selfish, don't be all caught up in like everybody has to think the way that you think, or everybody has to do what you do, or if you experienced it this one way, everybody had to experience that way, or this idea that that it's all about you in that moment. But consider this idea that rather, this talks about do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility. That sets a posture for us, a posture of being willing to be curious, a posture of being able to understand and recognize that there might be other experiences, other views, other emotions that might show up when we interact with others. And through that posture of humility, we are willing with grace to receive and to serve. Okay, and then I want to get to this last quadrant, which we've talked about all four of these. The fourth one, remember that idea of being of relational management, like navigating, embracing our relationships with emotional wisdom, right? The wisdom that others may experience. And I want to read from Ephesians chapter 4. So Paul's talking this, and he's talking about the idea of like relational harmony. And he says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient. Bear with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. I love that passage. Right, here's Paul speaking to the church of Ephesus with this instruction around relational attunement or relational harmony, right? Be completely humble and gentle, right? Back to this idea of like have a posture of insight and awareness, right? That you've checked in with yourself, you know what's going on with you, you know why it's happening. You've been able to do the work of not just self-awareness, but self-management, right? You're able to take a deep breath. You're able to be in control of what happens next, which is some response, right, that's coming from you, right, that you're able to influence and ultimately control in a way that you are able to lead your emotions rather than your emotions are leading you. You're able to be mindful that other people have emotions too, and you're stepping into this place, right? Be completely humble and gentle, like cool, calm, and collected, right? Self-regulated and managed. This part of bearing with one another in love. The bearing part is being able to be with people, understand them, hear them, listen to them, right? Be empathetic, validate their experience, right? And then this part of relational management, relational harmony. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Leverage everything that we just talked about in a way that you're going to speak with truth and love and grace and kindness, right? You're going to build connection and form unity and harmony with those meaningful people in your life. Okay, so as we think about this in a very practical kind of way, like from a clinical standpoint, like strong emotional intelligence, or the idea of EQ, it not only enriches our relationships, but it also improves like our mental health, our spiritual health, our physical health, when we can start to be able to be emotionally intelligent. It reduces stress. It enhances our overall resilience, our well-being, right? When we're able to be insightful about ourselves, about others, and our relationship with them. So here's some practical reflection I would encourage you to consider. So would love for you sometime today or sometime this weekend. We're going to work on cultivating biblical emotional intelligence. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a quiet moment and to do some reflective work. And I'm just going to give you some questions that I've written down. I want to read for you. So, of the talk today, consider this question. Which of these EQ areas do you feel most prompted to develop? Remember, we talked about self-awareness, we talked about self-management, we talked about other awareness, and we talked about relational management. So which of these EQ areas do you feel most prompted to develop? Second question is this. How might growing in one of these biblical EQ principles actually positively impact your relationships and your emotional health? And then the third question. Write down one practical, actionable step that you'll take this coming week to intentionally build your EQ. Okay, I'm just going to actually give you a very practical next step in this direction. So rather than you having to come up with all on your own or search the internet to come up with a list, I'm actually literally just going to hand it to you. And it's this. On Monday, we are, if you're watching this live, right here we are, Faithful Friday. On Monday, we're going to kick off our next 14-day challenge. And it's called Embracing Emotional Strength. Okay, so the application here, the practical next step you can take. You can actually go today. You're in our platform already, so you can find that Embracing Emotional Strength challenge. You can sign up in advance for it. Just put your name in, put your information down, and you will have access. It's free for you to do that, to that challenge. As I mentioned, that challenge is going to kick off on Monday. Embracing Emotional Strength is a 14-day challenge to enhance emotional intelligence. And in that challenge, we're going to talk all about the models we use around like CBT and DBT and EFT and EQ. And like in the midst of all that, we're going to explain what are those acronyms, what does that stand for, what's the insightful part of psychology and model formations that help us be able to do this work to increase our emotional intelligence. Got it? So that's the work for today. Today you're going to go and you're going to download or you're going to access this challenge. Sometime this weekend, let me just go back. You're going to do these reflective questions that I just offered you a few moments ago. And then on Monday, you're going to join us for the Embracing Emotional Strength Challenge. Again, that will kick off Monday, and it's a 2-week, 14-day challenge. Okay, so let me just, as we wrap up, just this encouragement. I think maybe you heard this today, and somewhere in the midst of the conversation of increasing emotional intelligence, somewhere in the back of your mind, for some of you, you're like, emotions don't really matter. They're no big deal. I don't even know why we have them. I wish like it wasn't even a thing. Or you're saying, man, emotions are complicated and they're hard. I have no idea how to navigate them, and I've worked my whole life to avoid them. Like, to those of you who have had those thoughts, those have been your experiences, would really encourage you in everything you want to like run away from this, I really encourage you to lean into this, run towards this. For others of you, you may feel like you've done some of this work, or you've grown or increased, over time, in this area of emotional intelligence. Remember, I said at the very beginning that unlike IQ, EQ is something we can continue to develop and grow all throughout our lives. So I say to you is there's more work to be done. There's more insight to be had, and there's more opportunity for you in this. So take advantage of that. See this as your opportunity for growth. All right, everyone. Hope you have an amazing weekend. I'll be back on Monday. On Monday, we're going to continue a conversation in Mindset Monday, which is around the same idea of emotional health, as we also on Monday kick off, as I mentioned, the Embracing Emotional Strength Challenge. Again, work through these processing questions, access the challenge. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.